The court was laughing, not the careful laughter of people performing amusement for a king who expected it, not the managed social noise of courtiers calculating the correct response to a powerful man's joke. Genuine laughter, the specific sound of several hundred people in a great hall who are actually enjoying themselves because the person at the center of the room is genuinely enjoyable to be around. The person at the center of the room was 18 years old. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall. He could ride all day, dance all evening, and debate theology until midnight with the finest minds in Europe. He composed music. 2 of his compositions survive and are still performed. He jousted with the enthusiasm of someone who was very good at it and knew it. He read voraciously. He wrote. He argued. He listened. Genuinely listened, in the way that people who are confident enough not to need to perform, listening, actually listen. This was Henry VIII in 1509. This was the king that England had been waiting for. And this is the story of what happened to him. Henry VIII was not supposed to be king. This is the fact that explains more about what he became than almost anything else in his story, and it is the fact most often overlooked in favor of the more dramatic material that came later. He was the second son, his brother Arthur, older, formally educated for kingship from birth, already married to Catherine of Aragon at 15, was the heir. Henry was being prepared for the church, a different life, a quieter life, a life without the specific weight of a dynasty resting on his continued existence. Arthur died in April 1502. He was 15 years old. The cause was almost certainly sweating sickness. Henry was 10 years old when his brother died, and the entire architecture of his expected future rearranged itself overnight. He was no longer the spare. He was the heir. And everything that came with that, the surveillance, the managed isolation of a boy who was now the only male Tudor standing between the dynasty and extinction, the specific education of someone whose body was now a political object, closed around him with the speed of a system responding to an emergency. His father, Henry VII, a king who had survived enough political catastrophe to be suspicious of everything, kept him under conditions that contemporaries described as restrictive even by the standards of the period. He did not go out without supervision. He did not meet people without approval. He lived, for the years between Arthur's death and his own accession, inside the specific confinement of someone too valuable to risk. What this produced, in a boy of exceptional intelligence and exceptional physical gifts who was given exceptional education but exceptional freedom to use none of it, was a pressure that had nowhere to go. When Henry VII died in 1509 and Henry came to the throne at 17, the release of that pressure was visible to everyone around him. The court that had been careful and joyless under the suspicious old king reorganized itself around the new one with the relief of people who had been holding their breath for years. Thomas More, who would one day refuse Henry one question and die for it, wrote that the accession felt like a prisoner released from darkness into light. This was not flattery. More was not a man given to flattery. He meant it. The young king was everything the old king had not been. He was open. He was generous. He was intellectually curious. He genuinely wanted the best minds around him, and he understood that the best minds did not simply agree with everything he said. He married Catherine of Aragon within weeks of his accession, his brother's widow, 6 years his senior, already familiar with the Tudor court. He called her his perfect companion. He meant it. Whatever Henry VIII became later, in the beginning this was a real marriage between two people who respected each other. If this changes how you see history, subscribe to Unknown Chronicles. We find the rooms history locked. The succession question arrived slowly, not as a crisis, not as a declaration, as a mathematics problem that nobody wanted to solve out loud. Catherine's pregnancies came and went with the specific cruelty of Tudor obstetrics. A son born in January 1511 who lived 52 days. Other pregnancies that did not reach term. A daughter in 1516, Mary, healthy and sharp and entirely the wrong sex by the brutal calculation of Tudor succession logic. Each loss reset the anxiety without resolving it. Each reset added pressure to a question that had no clean answer. Henry bore this with more patience than he is usually credited with in the first decade of his reign. He was young. Catherine was young. Time existed. The question was present but manageable. The court discussed it in the specific, careful language that courts use for topics too dangerous to address directly. Not because anyone had forbidden the discussion, but because the discussion had consequences that nobody wanted to be responsible for initiating. What changed the calculation was time itself. By the early 1520s, Henry was in his 30s. Catherine was in her 40s. The medical reality of Tudor reproduction applied to a woman of Catherine's age who had already lost multiple pregnancies was not encouraging. The window that had made patience a reasonable strategy was closing, and the question that had been distant was arriving at every formal occasion with the urgency of something that could no longer be managed with careful language. Henry's response to this urgency, and the responses documented in the letters and ambassador reports of the period with enough consistency to be trusted, was not immediate cruelty. It was the specific anxiety of a man who had been raised to understand that a male heir was not a personal preference but a dynastic necessity, and who was watching the clock run out on his ability to provide one. This matters. The man who would eventually destroy his marriage, his chancellor, his closest friend, and the religious settlement of his entire kingdom did not begin from a position of casual cruelty. He began from a position of genuine fear about what happened to a dynasty without a male heir. That fear was not irrational. The Wars of the Roses, the dynastic catastrophe that had produced the Tudor dynasty in the first place, was within living memory. Henry had been taught its lessons before he could read. The fear was real. The question was what he would do with it. The first solution seemed reasonable. By the late 1520s, Henry had developed the theological argument that would eventually become the official justification for ending his marriage to Catherine. The argument was that his marriage had been invalid from the beginning, that Catherine had first been married to his brother Arthur, that the papal dispensation permitting the marriage had been improperly granted, and that he had been living in sin for 20 years without knowing it. The argument was legally and theologically weak. Every scholar Catherine's team engaged demolished it with available precedent. The Pope, under significant pressure from Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, refused to grant the annulment. What Henry did next is the first genuinely irreversible moment in his transformation. He removed England from the authority of the papacy entirely. He appointed himself head of the English Church. He obtained his annulment from the Archbishop of Canterbury he had appointed for the purpose. He married Anne Boleyn. He declared his daughter, Mary, illegitimate. This decision, which would reshape English history for centuries, was made because one man needed a legal mechanism to end one marriage and begin another. The theological justification was constructed afterward to fit the conclusion that had already been reached. What the decision produced, beyond the marriage, beyond the religious settlement, beyond the international consequences, was a demonstration to Henry and to everyone around him that the system could be remade if the will existed to remake it. That institutions which had seemed immovable were not immovable. That the answer to an obstacle was not to accept it, but to remove it. The obstacle in this case was the Pope. The solution was to make the Pope irrelevant. It worked. That working was the most dangerous thing that had happened in Henry's reign so far. The men who helped him do it understood, some of them, what they were creating. Thomas Cromwell, who rose to become Henry's chief minister in the early 1530s and who provided the administrative machinery for the break with Rome, understood it most clearly. Cromwell was not an idealist. He was not primarily a religious reformer, though he used the Reformation for his purposes. He was an administrator of genius who understood that Henry's need for the break with Rome created an opportunity to reshape the English state in ways that would outlast any single marriage. He built the machinery, He managed the parliament. He drafted the legislation. He handled the resistance, the men who refused to accept the supremacy, the men who would not take the oath, the men who believed that some things were not the king's to take. Thomas More was one of those men. More, Henry's closest friend, the man who had written that the accession felt like emerging from darkness into light, the man whose company Henry had genuinely valued for 20 years, refused to say yes to a question he could not answer honestly. He did not campaign against the supremacy. He did not organize resistance. He simply refused to affirm what he did not believe. Henry had him executed in July 1535. The accounts of how Henry received the news of More's execution are not consistent. Some suggest he received it without visible emotion. Some suggest he was disturbed. What is consistent is that he did not reverse the decision. What is consistent is that More's refusal, the refusal of his closest friend, the most respected humanist in England, a man who had never acted against Henry in any practical sense, was treated as treason sufficient for death. Contemporaries noted the silence that followed. Not the silence of grief, the silence of a court that had just received information about what the rules now were and was adjusting its behaviour accordingly. Fewer people finished sentences around Henry after More's death. The ones who did were the ones who had learned to finish them in ways that pleased him. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. The body was changing at the same time the politics were. The jousting accident of January 1536 is where most accounts of Henry's physical transformation begin. It is not where it actually began. He had been accumulating injuries for 20 years before the fall at Greenwich that knocked him unconscious for 2 hours. His legs had been causing problems since the late 1520s. Ulcers that Tudor medicine could not treat effectively and that produced chronic pain that never fully resolved. The 1536 fall was different in degree, not in kind. He recovered. But the court that had waited in terror through the 2 hours of unconsciousness had received a demonstration of something it already knew abstractly and now knew concretely. There was no succession plan. There was no male heir. The entire political stability of England rested on the continued heartbeat of one man whose body was becoming unreliable. The court adapted. Courts always adapt. The staircases that had become difficult were avoided in the planning of his movements. The chairs were moved closer to the fire. The food that caused problems was removed from menus without announcement. The managed invisibility of service to someone too powerful to acknowledge that service was required. What the pain did to Henry's political judgment is harder to document than what it did to his body. The accounts suggest, and contemporaries suggested at the time, with the careful indirection of people writing things that could get them killed, that the chronic discomfort of a man whose body was constantly objecting to his will produced a quality of irritability in the court that had not been there before. That decisions were made in the specific friction of pain that might have been made differently without it. The evidence for this is not conclusive. It is the kind of claim that requires careful handling. What is in the evidence is the pattern, that the decisions of Henry's final decade have a quality of sudden acceleration and sudden reversal, that the decisions of his first decade do not, that the tolerance for argument and for the pushback that the young king had genuinely welcomed had contracted into something smaller and less predictable. The court noticed. The court noticed everything. It just did not say so. Anne Boleyn was executed in May 1536, 4 months after the jousting accident. The case against her, adultery, incest, treason, was constructed by Cromwell with the specific efficiency of a man who had been given a result and was building the evidence backward from it. 5 men were charged alongside her. The evidence against all of them was thin to the point of transparency. The trial was conducted with the specific procedural efficiency of a verdict that had been decided before a single witness was interviewed. Henry wore yellow the day after her execution. Whether this was mourning in the Spanish tradition or celebration is a question historians have never resolved. Henry never explained it. He married Jane Seymour 11 days after Anne Boleyn's death. What the sequence communicates, the speed of it, the specific efficiency of the destruction of a woman Henry had spent 7 years pursuing and 3 years married to, is not primarily about Anne Boleyn. It is about what Henry had become willing to do and how quickly he had become willing to do it. In 1509, the young king had been reluctant to execute even the 2 ministers his people most hated, and had done it primarily because the people wanted it and he wanted the people to know he was listening. By 1536, he was executing his wife on evidence that everyone in the court understood was constructed. The distance between those 2 moments is the transformation, not a single decision, not a single turning point. A series of solutions to real problems that each made the next solution slightly more available, slightly more thinkable, slightly more executable, slightly less likely to produce the internal resistance that might have stopped it. No heir, so break with Rome. Break with Rome, so suppress resistance. Suppress resistance, so execute opposition. Execute opposition, so fear replaces counsel. Fear replaces counsel, so decisions get worse. Worse decisions, so more problems requiring more solutions. The court of Henry VIII's final decade was not the court of 1509. The men who had known the young king, who had jousted with him and debated theology with him and told him things he did not want to hear, were almost all gone. More, executed. Wolsey, dead before execution. Cromwell, executed in 1540 by the same machinery he had helped build. Fisher, executed. The list of men who had been close to Henry and were no longer alive was a document in itself. The men around him at the end were men who had learned their profession in the court he had created. Men who understood that proximity to the king required the management of information, the careful selection of what was said and what was not, the specific skill of keeping a powerful and increasingly unpredictable man comfortable enough to remain functional. Ambassador reports from the final years are the most revealing documents. Written in the specific diplomatic code of people who understood their letters were being intercepted, they communicate through careful understatement what the English court had become. A place where nobody said what they thought, where the gap between what was believed and what was expressed had become so wide that the court operated in a permanent state of managed performance. The young king who had welcomed argument and valued honest counsel had created through 40 years of solutions to real problems a court that could not give him honest counsel because honest counsel had become too dangerous to offer. The thing he had valued most in 1509, the genuine engagement of genuine minds, was the thing his power had made impossible by 1545. He died in January 1547. He was 55 years old. The man in the portraits of his final years is barely recognizable as the young king who had entered rooms to genuine laughter. The face has settled into the specific immobility of someone who has spent years in pain and years in the specific isolation of absolute power. The eyes carry the quality of someone who has not trusted the information coming into them for a very long time. His physicians knew he was dying. They did not tell him. Telling Henry VIII that he was dying was a crime, literally under Tudor law. Predicting the king's death was treason. So they managed him toward death with the same invisible efficiency with which they had managed everything else. He died without being told he was dying. The court reorganized itself within hours. Edward VI, 9 years old, serious and Protestant, was proclaimed king. The machinery of the institution continued without pause. The rooms were rearranged. The chair that had been moved to accommodate the difficulty with the stairs was removed because the new king did not need it. The spaces adjusted to the new occupant with the thoroughness of places that have housed power long enough to understand that power is always temporary and the space is always what remains. In the Tower of London, there is a record of Thomas More's execution in July 1535. There is a record of Anne Boleyn's execution in May 1536. There is a record of Thomas Cromwell's execution in July 1540. Three of the most significant people in Henry VIII's life, a friend, a wife, a minister, all processed through the same institution with the same administrative efficiency. The records do not note the relationship between the king and the people being executed. They note the date, the charge, the method, the outcome. The institution that processed them continued functioning after each one, with the thoroughness of something designed to outlast every individual within it. The young king who had entered rooms to genuine laughter had created a system in which the people closest to him were also the people most at risk from him. The laughter in the court of 1509 was real. The silence in the court of 1546 was real. Same king, same court, different kingdom, and a transformation so gradual that nobody inside it could point to the moment it became irreversible. Because there was no single moment. There never is. If this story reached you, subscribe to Unknown Chronicles. New documentary every week. There are more locked rooms in this history. We will keep finding them. At what point do you think Henry stopped solving problems and started creating them? Leave it in the comments. We read every one.